Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we have Assemblywoman Addie Jenne in the studio with us. Addie represents the 116th Assembly District up here, which takes in part of St. Lawrence County and part of Jefferson County along the River District. So, Addie, welcome back to North Country Matters. You have been our guest many times, and we have a lot to talk about today. There is so much going on that affects us here in the North Country. Decisions that are being made in Washington, decisions that are being made in Albany or about to be made, as the case may be. The last time you and I were together was actually in Watertown a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, for the Women's March rally that was held at the church there. And one of the things that I have seen since that event is the tremendous amount of civic engagement that everyday people all across the country have been interested in what's going on, interested in the decisions that are being made, trying to get a hold of their elected representatives. So what are you seeing as you're going around the district in terms of civic engagement? Are you getting more contact with constituents, or is it pretty much the same for you?
Well, I think one thing that has come from this very divisive election that we just had is that there's a lot of people that are paying attention and starting to get involved in civic dialogue and those types of things. I would say I definitely see an uptick in younger people becoming more engaged in what's going on in politics and in their communities, which is a good thing, regardless of what political ideology you come from. The fact that you want to engage in discussion about how to make your community better, I think, is always a good thing. But I'll tell you, there's probably just a lot more energy also behind the people that are engaged. I have people reach out to me on any number of issues throughout the year. But really the energy and the desire to really help make an impact has ramped up in the last couple of months.
Yeah, I've been seeing the exact same thing, and what's been interesting is that you've always been somebody who's been very visible in the district. You come to every community, you go to every event. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you wonder if you ever sleep, because it seems like you're always in the car going somewhere. And so, and you just mentioned about, why people get a hold of you. Let's give folks a little thumbnail sketch of how your office is able to deliver constituent services. And it isn't just about always contacting us about North Country issues. Sometimes you're able to help interface with folks on federal issues as well, like maybe somebody's having trouble with the Veterans Department or something.
Well, actually, I have one staff member that spends a majority of her time working with veterans and their families to address the issues that they're having. But it can be, someone who's, had something, break at home, and so they're behind on bills and they need help. Or, yesterday I had a woman who's involved in the direct care of individuals in our community who came in to talk to me about how a change in Medicaid reimbursement is really impacting the people that she serves. Right down to something as basic as the diapers that they're able to get through Medicaid. And, just that change has really caused a lot of problems throughout the community, the community of people that are disabled in particular. So, it's a wide range of things that we deal with. A lot of people, call or write a letter regarding a policy issue that we're talking about. But we do help people that call in and they haven't been able to talk to a real person and they have an issue with the government, or maybe not even with the government. It may be more social, related, but we're able to give them the resources that we know about to help solve their problem.
Right, and problem solving is part of what government service and civil service is all about, isn't it?
Well, I think that's what
that's all it is. That's all what it's about.
So.
And the other thing I think that's always good to remind people about is that while you may be a Democrat, you serve every single person who is in the 116th. It isn't about party affiliation. It isn't about anything like that. It's about serving the entire population all the time with whatever their needs are.
Exactly. We don't ask what people's party registration is or even care if somebody calls our office. We're there as a branch of the government, and if we can provide assistance to someone, that's what we do.
So In New York State, things got off to a bit of an unusual start legislatively this year.
Yes.
The governor decided to give 6 State of the State addresses around the state. I actually listened to all of them, online. I kind of got a feeling like it was his "What Have I Done For You Lately" tour, because he was so specific about what he had done for each region of the state. Of course, he didn't come to the North Country, so we didn't hear much about that. But right now, you're in the budget process. You're talking about, how to fund different programs. One of the things that we heard a lot about was the middle class. A lot of programs that are being directed by the middle class, but that doesn't really always meet the needs of people in rural New York, does it? So
not necessarily.
Not
And the middle
necessarily.
class isn't always the middle class.
Right.
And, so there are, a number of provisions, in the state budget that I think if they had been presented to us in the standard format, that I'm not sure how many of us would have stayed for the entire speech. The proposal on school aid is deplorable. It is devastating for the North Country. It is one of the biggest things that I, as well as my colleagues, will be pushing back against in our response to our official response to the governor's proposed budget. But even things that he is touting out there, like free tuition, is really not what it seems. It's not how it's being advertised. And so, it's going to be a tough budget year, and all of us recognize that. But there's a lot of, information out there that's not completely accurate. And I guess that's the name of the game in politics.
Alternative facts, right, alternative facts.
And so it's important for us to kind of weed through all of that and try to do what we can for our communities, even though it's a tough budget year.
Right, and you mentioned the whole issue of school funding, and every year we hear the same rhetoric that comes up about how we're going to reform the way the funding formulas work. And every year it's the sort of the same old, and that doesn't happen. Do you see anything positive on the funding formula changes?
Well, he gets rid of the funding formula completely. And so what is nice is that I think everybody has come back to the table and said, as flawed as the foundation aid formula is, it's far better than what the governor has proposed in his budget this year. He has really gotten away from that. There really is very little in the way of balancing the needs of our poorest areas of the state, against those who have all of the resources they need to take care of their educational system. And
the property tax wealth to go with it, whereas up here,
right.
Property tax wealth is one of our deficits.
Well, yes, and also our size. We may on paper look like we have property wealth and poor students, but then when you add the poor economies of scale, because it's a small district, I'll take Alex Bay for example. They just they don't have the economies of scale. If they had maybe 700 or 800 more students, they would be able to make it, but. It's a very challenging budget year for most of our schools, and add on top of it the gutting of the foundation aid, which does tend to help the majority of our students up here, our schools. That's a big problem.
It is. And one of the other big problems, and this is something that there's so much uncertainty because of what's happening at the federal government side, is the whole topic around healthcare and healthcare funding and healthcare providing. And there's, if the Affordable Care Act is repealed, according to the New York State Health Department, 2.7 million New Yorkers will be losing their health care. That's about 22,000 people between St. Lawrence and Jefferson County alone. Right. So that's an issue.
Not only do we have the problem with our families losing coverage and then not getting the care that they need and letting things go too long and then having real problem
right.
Health-wise, but it also is going to have a devastating impact on our hospitals. They have worked very hard over the last several years to make the changes they need to swing more toward preventative care and less hospital visits, and they're doing as good a job as anybody else is in this state and in this country. But if we then pull the rug out from underneath them by having a huge chunk of our community not have insurance any longer, that is going to devastate them. And so, if we want to ensure that we have a healthcare system here in the North Country, we cannot just repeal the Affordable Care Act. we have to look at the long-term tweaks to it. You know, there are some changes that can be made to it, but completely repealing it will throw our healthcare system into a spiral that I'm not sure all of our facilities would make it back from.
No, I don't think they would either. And many of our and you've got, what, 5 hospitals in your district? So a lot of them have worked very hard on improving and expanding the number of providers and the number of programs that they offer. And it's just not feasible up here to go to Burlington or to go to Messina, or go to Syracuse for health care if it can be provided up here, which it is being provided up here now because of these expansions. So it's going to have a devastating effect not only on the providers but on the recipients if we do that. When we were together in Watertown, one of the speakers at that event was Tess Barker, who was with the North Country Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood has been under the gun. For 100 years they've been under the gun, but they provide absolutely critical healthcare services to a lot of people up here in the North Country. They've got about 12,000 people who directly get their care through them. One of the problems with the talk about repeal of the Affordable Care Act is possibly losing the contraceptive coverage care and some others. But New York State's been working on some of those issues, hasn't it, in terms of making maybe some legislative and insurance changes to protect that care?
Well, sort of. In the State Assembly, we have been taking steps to protect that care and to ensure that the insurance coverage that's in effect right now would continue to be in effect if the Affordable Care Act was repealed. However, the State Senate hasn't looked at that legislation at all. I think they're missing the boat. Here, the cost of prescriptions oftentimes prohibits people from being able to access, contraception and things like that. Are working poor, and that's something that I really I can't let happen. We're on such thin margins here. That's one of the things in the Affordable Care Act that really helps a family on a weekly basis.
It made a huge difference. It made a huge difference to people. The other piece of that is the pre-existing condition piece, because people were cut out of getting affordable insurance because they had something wrong with them. And for 51% of the population, like you and I, being a woman was considered a pre-existing condition. So that's a little hard to make go away. So these are all
I'll
issues.
also point out is, the same thing with our hospitals. If they don't receive funding, that's going to cause a provider shortage. We don't have enough providers for women's health in our communities as it is. I'll put it out there. I'm now a patient at Planned Parenthood. I'm, done having babies. My visits are very routine. It's, blood pressure and heart and listening to my lungs pretty much at this point. But, I was able to get in a very short period of time. Whereas if I wanted to see a regular, OBGYN in the community, that would have taken me months to get in because we have a shortage of providers, and many of them are focused on serving, the new mothers, the expectant and new mothers. And, so we would really have a huge hole in our healthcare system if the providers at Planned Parenthood were to disappear out of our communities.
That's right. And there's, as I say, 12,000 patients that they have right now, and they serve 5 very rural counties up here, and nobody's going to come up here and say, I am just waiting to come to the North Country to build a practice, because the same things that constrain us are why we are looking for internal, inside the district solutions. And Planned Parenthood is one of those great ones. You'd mentioned before about the pre-college, which really isn't free.
No,
it's not really
it's far from free.
And there are a lot of problems with that proposal, and there are a lot of people at the lower end of the income scale who are struggling now to meet their college expenses who are not being served at all.
Well, first of all, the governor's proposal is really a trap for students and their families. It puts the requirement that you essentially can't ever change your major. You can't ever drop below 15 credit hours. I'm okay with things like having a minimum GPA, but then it also doesn't cover anything more than tuition. So it doesn't cover all the fees, it doesn't cover books, it doesn't cover room and board, which is a huge portion of what it costs to go to college. And so, you know,
it's all those fees are much greater than the cost
Right.
of tuition per semester.
Right, and it only takes effect after all of your other student aid is calculated in. And so it really is, you know, this high stakes thing. And I know as a student that I worked 2 jobs at one point during college. You know, having that added pressure that if I had to drop a class, that I then wouldn't get my student aid that I had counted on, and that was part of my decision for, you know, where I went to college. That really would have been devastating to myself and my family. I probably would have had to scale back and work even more, and, you know, delay getting into the workforce even longer. So it really sets up a potential, you know, trap door for students and our families who are struggling to be able to afford the rest of those expenses.
And the other problem with that is that by not putting money into the public education system, you're not giving students the resources they need to go to college and be successful in the first place, because they don't have the academic background they need. And college for all is not a fix for failing to do high school properly, high school education
Well,
properly.
there's that too. But I also want to make the point that we already have programs in place to help our working poor and our lower middle class. We have the TAP program. I think it would be a far better strategy for us to keep it simple, stupid, as they say, and adjust the brackets and the TAP awards for our students. It provides, you know, stability. It recognizes, you know, that 12 credit hours is considered full-time. And, you know, I think we wouldn't also then have to create a whole new administrative process for families to go through and for the state to have to administer. It makes a lot more sense if we're trying to ensure access to our public institutions, that we look at increasing the TAP awards for our working poor and lower middle class families.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. One of the topics, and again this comes from the top down in the federal government, is voting reform. There is some thought that there's a lot of voter fraud. Apparently it's all within the Trump administration family, and from what I can tell, but anyway, there's a lot of proposals about how do we modernize the voting system here in New York State, because it's quite antiquated. There are many, many proposals out there that other states have adopted that are helping folks to get to the polls. And the governor's got some ideas, the attorney general's got ideas. I know the Assembly has always has bills on its plate for
Yes.
voting reform. What are the chances we'll see something significant come out of Albany this year?
Well, in the Assembly, we generally pass voting reform measures. You know, we look, you know, some of the things that are being talked about this year, again, are early voting, which is essentially being able to vote absentee without having to have one of the few reasons that you can check the box to
Right.
receive your ballot. You know, I think that's extremely important. You know, but I'm always trying to make it better. I don't think we have an inherently flawed system. I think if you ask people in the North Country, were they able to vote? Did they have a good experience voting? I think they'll say that they have. You know, so I don't think we have a terribly bad situation, but, you know, being able to vote absentee so that you can account for work schedules and the hectic life that so many
Right.
people lead, that would be a step in the right direction.
Yes, for the most part, we don't see the kind of lines down the street and around the block that we see in some of the more urban areas where
Right.
New York State only has one-day voting, and other states have, sometimes they've got early voting where it's physical voting, but it's for several days
Right.
or a week, or they open it up on weekends when people's schedulers are more free. So there are things that we could do that would open that process up to more people.
Right, and then there's the huge unfunded mandate of having multiple primaries.
Yeah,
That is really something that we should be able to put our heads together and figure out.
right. Last year was particularly bad because there were 4 different elections that the Board of Elections were responsible for because it was a presidential year, and that burden was huge on them.
It is, and it falls to the taxpayers, and we have, you know, a poor county here in St. Lawrence County, and having that.
We have more places to spend our money.
Yes, we can spend our money in lots of other places, so, you know, it would be nice to think that we could take care of that, but, it's something I think we need to do for our counties.
So last fall when you were here, Addie, one of the things that we talked about was improving the economy of the North Country. You had specifically mentioned value-added agriculture.
Yes.
Because that is such a huge part of our local
Yes.
economy. So I was just reading the other day that the number of breweries in New York State has increased more than 300 now, which is more than it was back in Prohibition days. So there's a small part of value-added agriculture, but what really is going on in that area? What do you see as happening in that, and are there new initiatives coming out?
Well, I'm hoping to build on my successful Farm to School program, which put money right in the school district's pockets that to be able to then work with our local farmers and purchase their produce. And that has been going extremely well. Some have also made investments in equipment that will allow them to grow some of their own food during the school year. The school gardens are something everybody appreciates, but it needs to be weeded and harvested all summer long. And so there is technology from a local business that is allowing them to essentially grow their own salads right in the school. So it's been a mix of working with our traditional farmers and their harvest cycle, as well as the use of technology, and also bringing agriculture back into many of our schools that have lost it over the years.
That's right.
But I'm also I'm very concerned about our dairy industry. They have been suffering from very low milk prices for a very long time. And even when milk prices go back up, they don't stay up very long. They come back down.
And it's not like the money is going in the farmers' pockets,
No.
ever.
No. And if there's one way that I think we could absolutely have a positive impact on the quote-unquote upstate economy, it's to strengthen our agriculture sector and understand that dairy is huge in New York, particularly in the North Country, and that just like the governor provides financial incentives to anybody who wants to come to New York State and start a business, or anybody that needs help retaining their jobs, buying a new piece of equipment, becoming more competitive. I think that now is the time in this budget year to create a program that puts our farmers on the same status of importance within our economy and provide them with economic incentives to help them to stay competitive. This is, farmers aren't looking for handouts, they're looking to be able to stay competitive and to be valued for what they do and what they produce here. And I tell you, they produce some of the best quality milk, and that can help us access other markets. So I'm looking at putting together a proposal for this year's budget to recognize the quality that our farmers are producing, and also provide them with financial stability so that they can continue to get better at what they do and feed the world.
If we put the same effort into agriculture that we put into attracting tech businesses to this state, it would really transform farming, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but farming is technology now,
It is
too.
now. It is now.
So
but we are
if you have a sector that can't invest in itself and can't continue to take advantage of technology, we really hinder an entire economic sector. I mean, it's everybody has tried to crack this nut, and it seems pretty simple to me that it's time to put our money where our mouth is and support our farmers.
That's right, and they'll put it right back in our mouths as a product.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things, Addie, that there was a lot of talk about last year and a little bit of talk about this year is ethics reform. And it's something that in New York State seems to be kind of a cyclical type of conversation. But one of the pieces of ethics reform has been the talk about term limits. And, I come down on the school of thinking that term limits aren't good, because if you have good legislators, you don't want to have to lose them because of term limits, and that bad ones will eventually go to jail if things work out the way they're supposed to. But in any case...
that has been the case, Donna.
Well, it has
I
been.
will have to say that has been the case. And so I think people should, be able to see that we've put laws into place and we've been more transparent, and that has resulted in cases being brought.
But one of the proposals that is of interest, I think, is the idea of putting term limits on leadership roles, so that you don't get someone in a leadership role who is there for many, many, many years, because that can block progress. It can certainly block leadership development. It can block new ideas. So what's your thinking on term limits in leadership roles?
I would say the same thing. Why throw out a good leader if if they're doing a good job. I'll tell you, it is not easy to be the Speaker of the Assembly, and we've had a tremendous amount of turnover in our House.
Right.
And really that position is about figuring out what's going on in all of our communities, listening to us, and then doing their best to stick up for the working poor is really what we look out for. Our working poor, our lower middle class, our families that are struggling. I guess for the same reason that I don't believe we should be putting term limits on individual members. I do have a term limit. It's every 2 years, and believe me, I know that I have an election every 2 years. If someone's doing a good job, I'm not sure why. In any instance that you would want to get rid of someone.
The voters have control over who we send to the Assembly and the Senate. We don't have as much control over the leadership within those bodies. And so I think maybe that's where some of the thinking from the outside is looking, maybe we would see more new ideas come forward.
Well, I think that should be something that you should hold your individual members accountable for. If they're able to bring across, in the state legislature, the issues that are going on in your community, I think that should be the litmus test. And if you're able to really convey that and get results for your community, I think that's all part of the structure of it. And so, if you want to have an impact, I think turning over, looking at what your member is doing for you and your community is still the most important election to look at.
Right. Well, that's good. The New York State legislative session is really divided into two parts. The first part is the budget part, which is due
April 1st.
And for the last few years has mostly come in on time. And the second part is actually going to be about talking about taking up legislation and other kinds of things like that. One of the frustrating things, I think, for all of us is that you do occasionally come to agreement in the Senate and the Assembly, and you pass a bill, sometimes unanimously, like with the Defense Council bill, and then it doesn't make it past the governor's veto. So what can be done in cases like that? Is there an override potential? Can the Assembly and legislature override a veto, or is it the way they're structured, you don't ever come back and have a chance to do that?
Well, we can do that absolutely, but logistically we didn't really have that ability with the indigent legal defense this year, which would have been a tremendous cost shift for particularly St. Lawrence County. The issue is that the governor vetoed it so late in the year that we could not have come back and practically been able to override it. That is because we had an election, and so a whole new legislature was elected and seated. If it had been, the year prior, yes, we could have come back and
You could have taken that up in the next session? Not so much.
I gotta get into Robert's rules.
Okay, let's not.
I think we could, and it would have been easier, but still, with a bill that had that much support, there's, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to.
I think it was unanimous in both houses, wasn't it?
Yes.
So I mean, there was clearly, the message had been sent from all of the folks in the counties to their representatives that this was an important piece.
Absolutely.
And
I suspect that this will be a focus in the post-budget legislative term.
Good. Well, we'll have you come back after the budget is done, and we'll talk about some of the legislative initiatives that are going to be out there, because it's going to be a busy year.
Yes.
Once you get the election or the budget out of the way, there's always plenty of work to do in that second part, isn't there?
Yes, there is. There always is.
Well, Addie, thank you very much for coming in. It's always a pleasure to have you explain what's going on in Albany to us, because it is important. It makes a big difference in our lives. Our conversations are a product of North Country Matters, which is filmed here in the Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center in the basement of the Potsdam Public Library. These conversations are a product of North Country Matters. Our civic partners are the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County, American Association of University Women of St. Lawrence County, and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country Matters.